At 19 years old, Clara Whitmore had no home, no family willing to take her in, and only $11.40 sewn into the hem of her coat. The railroad company had cast her out of the little station house where she had worked because she refused to sign away money that did not belong to them, and in the cold autumn of 1893, she had nowhere left to go. So, with those $11.40, Clara bought a rusted railroad maintenance car from the abandoned sidings outside Bellwether, Colorado, paying $7 for a thing most sensible people would have considered worthless. It had broken windows, a roof that leaked, wheels frozen with rust, and a floor blackened by decades of dust. To everyone watching, it was a desperate and foolish purchase by a homeless girl with nowhere else to sleep. But beneath that ruined floor, sealed where no ordinary eye would have looked, waited a map drawn by a man who had disappeared nearly 20 years before. And what that map led Clara toward would not merely change the course of her own life. It would return something stolen from an entire community. Settle in, and let us tell you the story of Clara Whitmore. If you're watching from a place that feels forgotten, tell us in the comments. Clara had been raised where the mountains met the high plains, in a narrow valley called Bellwether Hollow, a place where the wind seemed to know every family by name, and the railroad tracks ran through town like two dark stitches holding the settlement together. In the summer, dust gathered along the wooden sidewalks and turned the lower half of every building the color of old bread. In winter, snow came down from the Sangre de Cristo Range and settled against fences until the whole valley looked softened and silent. There were perhaps 300 souls in Bellwether in those years, though Clara's father used to say that a town was never measured by its population. A town is measured by what its people carry for one another, Elias Whitmore would tell her. He was a station carpenter, a quiet man with broad hands, and a habit of saving nails that other people threw away. Clara's mother, Ruth, kept the small reading room beside the station and could mend almost anything made of cloth. Between them, they raised Clara with little money, but with the steady belief that usefulness was a kind of dignity. Clara learned early that broken things were rarely as broken as they appeared. When she was 6, she found a cracked tin cup behind the station. The rim was bent, the bottom dented, and the metal had begun to rust. Her father took it from her, examined it, and handed it back. "Can you make it useful?" Clara tried. She hammered the bottom flat with a wooden mallet, rubbed the rust away with sand, and patched the largest crack with a thin piece of tin. It was not pretty when she finished, but it held water. Her father smiled. "There you are." "What?" "Proof." "Proof of what?" "That worth and appearance aren't the same thing." Clara remembered those words long after she forgot many others. Her childhood was made of such lessons. She learned how to read freight labels, because her father believed a person should know what passed through her own town. She learned figures from the station ledgers, because her mother said numbers could tell a story if someone bothered to listen. She learned to sew, mend harness, oil hinges, patch roofs, and keep a fire alive through a snowstorm. Most importantly, she learned patience. A thing that refused to work on the first attempt, her father said, often only needed a second look. Bellwether's railroad station became the center of Clara's world. Trains arrived from Pueblo and continued toward the western mines, carrying coal, lumber, machinery, cattle feed, mail, and people who spoke of places so far away that Clara could hardly imagine them. She loved the sound of the locomotives at night. Long before she could see the lamps coming through the darkness, she could feel the rails trembling beneath her boots. Her father taught her the difference between an ordinary rattle and a dangerous one. Her mother taught her that every traveler deserved kindness, even if they never stayed long enough to repay it. And Clara grew into a young woman who knew how to make herself useful without making herself loud. Then, when she was 16, the first great loss came. Her mother caught pneumonia during a winter storm and died before spring. The reading room closed. The house became quieter. Elias Whitmore did his best to keep working, but grief settled over him like another season. He stopped saving nails. He stopped repairing things for neighbors unless they insisted. Sometimes Clara would find him sitting outside the station after dark, staring toward the tracks, as if waiting for a train that had no timetable. 3 years later, he died beneath a falling timber while repairing a freight platform. Clara was 19. She buried him beside her mother on a hillside where the prairie grass bent toward the mountains, and for a while she believed the hardest thing she would ever have to endure had already happened. She was wrong. After her father's death, Clara remained in the station house because there was nowhere else for her to go. The railroad had allowed Elias to live there because he worked for them, and Clara had helped in the station for years without complaint. She believed she would be allowed to stay. But the railroad had changed. A new superintendent named Silas Vane arrived in Bellwether that spring. He wore polished boots, carried a silver watch, and spoke about efficiency, as though human beings were obstacles that needed to be moved aside. He looked through the station records and discovered that Clara had been keeping the books temporarily after her father's death. "You've no authority to do that," he told her. Someone had to. Someone with authority. Clara placed the ledger on the desk. "The figures are correct." Silas looked at her, then at the ledger. "That is not the point." It soon became clear what the point was. A shipment of railroad supplies had disappeared from the records. Tools, timber, iron fittings, sacks of coal, and other materials had been charged to Bellwether but never delivered there. The amount was substantial enough to cause trouble. Clara discovered the missing supplies had been redirected to a private construction project owned by Silas Vane and 2 investors from Denver. She copied the relevant entries. Then she made the mistake of asking questions. Silas told her to forget what she had seen. Clara refused. She believed the matter could be corrected quietly if the railroad returned what belonged to the town. Instead, Silas accused her of altering the ledger. He told the company she had stolen money. The accusation spread faster than truth ever seemed able to travel. People who had known Clara since childhood began looking away when she passed. The company locked the station office. Silas ordered her out of the station house. When Clara protested, he gave her 1 hour to gather her belongings. She owned very little. A wool blanket, her mother's sewing tin, her father's wooden mallet, 2 dresses, a Bible with loose pages, and $11.40. By sunset, the station door was locked behind her. Clara stood beside the tracks with her possessions in a small canvas bag while the first evening train thundered through Bellwether without stopping. No one offered her a room. No one offered her a job. People were afraid of the railroad, and fear could make decent people quiet. So Clara walked beyond the town limits and slept beneath a cottonwood tree. The next morning, she found work where she could. She washed dishes at the boarding house. She repaired torn coats. She cleaned the schoolhouse. She mended harness for a rancher who paid her in flour. But every night, she slept somewhere different. She knew what it meant to be looked at and not seen. She knew what it meant to carry everything she owned on her back. And perhaps that was why the abandoned railroad car caught her attention. It sat 3 miles outside Bellwether on a siding that had not been used in years. The railroad called it Maintenance Car 47, though nobody in town called it anything anymore. It had once carried tools and crews along remote sections of track. Now its wheels were brown with rust, its windows were broken, and weeds grew between the boards beneath it. One afternoon, Clara walked around it slowly. She imagined what it might become. A shelter, a workshop, a place where she could sleep without asking permission, a place where she could earn money repairing things. The railroad had abandoned it. Clara had been abandoned too. Perhaps that was why she understood the car. An auction was held on a gray morning in October. There were no serious buyers. The car had been declared unusable, and the railroad wanted it removed from the property. Silas Vane stood nearby, laughing with two men from the freight office. When Clara approached, he raised an eyebrow. "You're interested in that?" "Yes." "You cannot afford it." "I can pay $7. One of the men laughed. Silas looked at the rusted car. $7? Clara counted the money into his hand. "7. He shrugged. "Take it." The transaction was finished in less than a minute. Clara walked away with $4.40 left. She had purchased a railroad car. She had also purchased the laughter of half the town. People called her foolish. Some said grief had made her unreasonable. Others said she would abandon the car before winter. Clara said nothing. She spent the first afternoon clearing weeds from the steps. The second day, she patched the roof. The third, she replaced a broken window with oiled canvas. She scrubbed the floorboards until the old wood showed through. She found a small iron stove in the rear compartment and repaired its flue. At night, she slept on her folded blanket beneath the roof she had patched herself. It was not a home yet, but it was hers. And for the first time since her father's death, Clara slept without wondering whether someone would order her outside in the morning. A week passed. Then another. Clara began repairing tools for ranchers. She sharpened saws. She fixed hinges. She mended wagon hardware. Word spread slowly. People came because she charged little and did good work. One afternoon, an old cattleman named Amos Bell brought her a broken lantern. "Thought you might save this." Clara turned it in her hands. "Most things can be saved." Amos smiled. "Your father used to say that." She looked up. "He did?" "All the time." Clara repaired the lantern. Amos paid her with $2 and a sack of potatoes. It was the first money she had earned without asking anyone for charity. The railroad car began to change. So did Clara. Yet something about the floor troubled her. There was a section beneath the stove where the board sounded different when struck. Clara noticed it one evening while sweeping. She tapped the floor with her father's wooden mallet. Knock. 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 The sound was hollow. She knelt. There was no visible seam. But Clara had spent her childhood around carpenters and railroad men. She knew wood. She knew nails. She knew when something had been fitted rather than simply built. She moved the stove aside. Then she pried up one board. Beneath it was another layer. Not rotten. Not accidental. A false floor. Clara's hands began to tremble. She removed the second board. There was a narrow iron box beneath it. The box was wrapped in oilcloth, black with age. For several moments, she simply stared. Then she lifted it into the lamplight. There was a name scratched into the lid. Micah Wickham. Clara knew the name. Everyone in Bellwether did. Micah Wickham had been a railroad surveyor. He had disappeared in 1875. People said he had stolen company money. Others said he had run away after a failed investment. His name had become something of a local ghost story. Clara had heard her father mention him only once. Micah was no thief, Elias had said. Clara had been too young to ask why. Now she understood why her father had sounded so certain. Inside the box was a folded map, a brass compass, 3 letters, and a small leather ledger. Clara opened the map first. It showed Bellwether Hollow as it had looked almost 20 years earlier. The railroad line was there. The creek was there. The old water tower was marked. But beyond the northern ridge, the map showed something Clara had never seen. A blue line ran beneath the mountains. Beside it, in Micah Wickham's handwriting, were the words, Bellwether water route. Clara read them twice. Then she opened the ledger. The pages contained measurements, rock formations, water levels, distances, and notes about an underground spring. Micah had discovered a natural water source beneath the northern ridge. A source large enough, according to his calculations, to supply Bellwether for generations. Clara's heart began to beat faster. The final pages contained financial records. The railroad had purchased rights to the land surrounding the spring, but the rights had never been properly transferred. Micah had written that a group of railroad executives intended to conceal the discovery and sell the water rights privately. The town would receive nothing. The people would remain dependent on water shipped by rail. Micah had tried to expose the scheme. Then he disappeared. Clara unfolded the first letter. It was addressed to the citizens of Bellwether. He had never delivered it. He wrote that the spring belonged, morally and legally, to the people who lived upon the land. He wrote that he had hidden the evidence because men within the railroad company had threatened him. He wrote that if anyone found the documents, they should take them to the county recorder. But there was more. The second letter was addressed to Elias Whitmore. Clara recognized her father's name immediately. Her fingers tightened around the paper. Micah wrote that Elias had helped him copy the original survey. He thanked him for refusing to participate in the concealment. Then came a sentence that changed everything. Should anything happen to me, Elias, keep the map safe until the people of Bellwether are ready to hear the truth. Clara sat very still. Her father had known. All those years. He had known that the railroad was concealing the water source. And now Clara understood something else. The ledger she had been accused of altering had not been altered. The missing supplies her father had investigated were connected to the same group. Silas Vane was not the beginning of the story. He was the latest man standing on top of it. Clara spent the night reading every page. Micah's final entry described a stone marker near the northern ridge. 3 pine trees. A split boulder. A shallow ravine. Then a line beneath it. The water waits where the mountain keeps its oldest shadow. The next morning, Clara took the map and walked north. She followed the creek, crossed a meadow, climbed through pine forest. By noon she found the 3 trees. One had fallen. The split boulder stood exactly where the map showed it. Behind it was the shallow ravine. Clara dug with a borrowed shovel. At first, she found only stones. Then the shovel struck metal. She knelt and cleared the earth. A small iron survey marker emerged. Beneath it was a second tube. Inside was a notarized copy of the original land agreement. The spring had never belonged to the railroad. It belonged to Bellwether County. The railroad had known it. Micah had known it. Clara's father had known it. And Silas Vane had almost certainly known it. She returned to Bellwether with the documents hidden beneath her coat. But she did not rush to the courthouse. Clara understood something Micah had understood before her. Truth needed witnesses. She began quietly. She showed the documents to Amos Bell. Then to the schoolteacher, Miriam Price. Then to the blacksmith, Jonah Reed. Then to the pastor, Reverend Caleb Morris. Each person read the papers in silence. The more they read, the more the old story of Bellwether began to change. For 18 years, the town had believed it was poor because the land was dry. Now they learned that the water had been there all along. And the railroad had known. Silas Vane heard about the documents within 3 days. He came to the railroad car after sunset. Clara was repairing a lantern when he knocked. "You have something that belongs to the company." Clara did not invite him inside. "No. You should be careful." "I have been careful." Silas looked at the repaired lantern hanging beside her door. "You think old papers will change anything?" "They might. They will only get you into trouble." Clara met his eyes. "You said that before." Silas stepped closer. The railroad owns this land. The county records say otherwise. His expression changed. Only slightly. But Clara saw it. The fear beneath the confidence. You don't understand what you're holding. I understand enough. Silas turned away. Then he looked back. You have nothing. Clara glanced inside the car. She had $4.40. A repaired stove? A sewing tin? A wooden mallet? A bedroll? And a map. She smiled faintly. Perhaps nothing is sometimes enough. Silas left. The next morning, the railroad filed a claim against the car. They said Clara had purchased it under improper circumstances. She knew what that meant. They wanted the map. But by then, Clara had already made copies. She had sent one set to the county recorder, another to a newspaper in Denver. A third she had given to Reverend Morris. The original map remained with her. For the first time, Silas Vane could not simply make the evidence disappear. Still, he had influence. The county commissioner was his friend. The railroad employed many men. Some townspeople feared losing their jobs. Others feared that challenging the railroad would bring hardship. Clara did not blame them. Fear was not wicked. It was simply heavy. So she did something unexpected. She invited everyone to the schoolhouse. Not to accuse. Not to shout. To read. One by one, the people of Bellwether entered. Old ranchers. Railroad workers. Mothers carrying children. Shopkeepers. Men who had once laughed at Clara's railroad car. Silas Vane did not come. The county commissioner came instead. Miriam Price placed Micah's map on the table. Amos Bell placed the notarized agreement beside it. Clara stood at the front of the room. She was 19 years old. She owned almost nothing. Yet when she began to speak, the room became quiet. She told them about Micah Whitcomb. She told them about her father. She told them about the spring. She did not embellish anything. She did not accuse anyone beyond what the documents proved. When she finished, Amos Bell rose. I reckon, he said slowly, we've been thirsty for 18 years because somebody wanted us to be. No one laughed. The next morning, the county recorder opened the old land records. The evidence matched. The water rights belonged to the county. The railroad's private claim was fraudulent. Silas Vane was removed from his position before the month ended. The company faced an investigation. But Clara did not celebrate. She walked back to the railroad car and sat on the steps. The victory felt strange. Her father was not there. Her mother was not there. She could not show them what she had found. Yet in the distance, she heard people talking about the spring. For the first time, they were talking about a future instead of a shortage. Over the following year, Bellwether changed. A well was drilled near the spring. The water was clean. A reservoir was built. The town planted trees along the creek. A small public garden appeared beside the schoolhouse. Farmers who had nearly left began staying. The railroad still passed through Bellwether, but it no longer controlled the town's survival. And the old railroad car? Clara kept it. The townspeople helped her repair it properly. Amos brought lumber. Jonah repaired the iron fittings. Miriam donated books. The school children painted the inside walls. It became a workshop and reading room. A place where anyone could come to mend something. A place where children learned that useful things did not have to be beautiful to matter. On the wall above Clara's workbench, she hung her father's wooden mallet. Beside it, she framed Micah Whitcomb's map. The map was no longer a secret. It became part of Bellwether's history. Years later, people would tell the story differently. Some would say Clara had been lucky. Others would say she had been brave. A few would call it fate. Clara herself never used any of those words. When children asked how she had found the map, she would simply smile and say, I listened when the floor sounded different. And perhaps that was the truest lesson. Because the thing that saved Bellwether had not looked valuable. It had been rusted, overlooked, abandoned. The same could have been said of Clara herself. The railroad had seen a homeless 19-year-old woman with $11.40 and decided she was worth very little. The town had seen a foolish girl buying a rusted maintenance car and laughed. But Clara had learned from her father that worth and appearance were never the same thing. The car was not worthless. The map was not worthless. The town was not worthless. And Clara was certainly not worthless. Silas Vane eventually left Colorado. His name remained in the county records, but not with the importance he had once imagined. His greatest punishment was not imprisonment or public humiliation. It was becoming ordinary. The town he had tried to control continued without him. Children drank from the reservoir. Farmers watered their fields. Families gathered beside the creek. And every autumn, when the mountains turned gold, Bellwether held a small gathering at the old station. They called it Wickham Day. They remembered the surveyor who had hidden the truth. They remembered Elias Whitmore, who had protected it. And they remembered Clara Whitmore, who had found it beneath the floor of a rusted railroad car. Clara eventually became the keeper of the reading room. She never became wealthy. She never wanted to. Her reward was simpler. She had a warm bed, a steady roof, work that mattered, and a town that no longer looked through her as though she were invisible. Sometimes, late in the evening, she would sit outside the old railroad car with a cup of coffee and listen to trains passing through Bellwether. The sound of the wheels over the rails still reminded her of the years when she had owned nothing but $11.40. But now, when the train passed, she did not hear loneliness. She heard movement. She heard possibility. She heard the sound of a town continuing forward. And perhaps that is where we should return to the beginning. At 19, Clara Whitmore had been homeless. She had been cast out by the railroad. She had been accused of wrongdoing because she refused to remain silent. She had carried $11.40 in the hem of her coat. With 7 of those dollars, she bought a rusted railroad car that nearly everyone believed was worthless. But beneath its floor was a map. And beneath that map was a forgotten truth. And beneath that truth was something even more important, the knowledge that a community's future had never truly been lost. It had only been hidden. Clara did not become important because she found treasure. She became important because she found something valuable and chose not to keep it for herself. That distinction mattered. The map could have made her rich if she had sold the secret. Instead, she gave it back. The water could have belonged to one family. Instead, it became the lifeblood of a town. The railroad car could have remained a shelter for one lonely girl. Instead, it became a place where generations learned to read, repair, gather, and remember. And Clara? She became the kind of person her father had hoped she would become. Someone who looked twice at broken things. Someone who listened when others dismissed the strange sound beneath the surface. Someone who understood that being overlooked was not the same as being without worth. Perhaps all of us have known something like that. Perhaps there has been a season when the world looked at what remained and decided it was not enough. Perhaps there has been a door closed, a home lost, a plan broken, or a dream left standing in the dust. But Clara's story reminds us that sometimes the most important things are waiting beneath what everyone else has already written off. The old car was not empty. The floor was not ordinary. The town was not doomed. And the young woman standing alone beside the tracks was not finished. She was only beginning. Thank you for spending these quiet minutes with us in Bellwether Hollow, and with Clara Whitmore, a young woman who discovered that what others abandoned could still carry a future inside it. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who might need the reminder that overlooked does not mean worthless. And before you go, tell us this. What is a time when you found value in something everyone else had written off? Until next time, stay close.